Greetings, everyone. I'm Steve Clemens. I have been for the last several years editor-at-large of The Hill. I'm moving into a new role at The Hill as contributing editor, and I am now going to be the founding editor-at-large of a brand new global digital media company called Semaphore. So there's the release on that. You can read about it in Politico. So we're going to have some fun. But today we're really going to have a fascinating discussion on a topic so dear to my heart, and it actually ought to be close to the heart of many, many Americans who are worried about the solvency of their democracy, how their government works, and just making sure that at someday we pay attention to the institutions and the people that we send to that. And to do that, and we're very happy to be doing this with the Association of the Former Members of Congress. I know we have a great number of former members on. So any of you that want to take on our speaker, go ahead and you'll be welcome to do that. You can list your question and answers, your comments, and your alternative recollections, which we're going to get to in a moment, in the Q&A section. And if you'd like to have yourself identified, just put your name there and I will notify that. And but anyone else, we're going to try to weave in questions through this conversation. So don't wait just until the end. If you've got a good question that's better than mine, I'm going to pose it. But we're here with Ben Nelson. I'm going to say, first of all, I rarely do this. Go buy this book. Death of the Senate is not just a catechism sort of over the Senate. It is also a pathway to say, if we want to save the institution and save democracy, it's an interesting set of recollections designed to educate the American audience about how important it is and what we can do to basically keep the Senate and this government from dying. But Ben Nelson, of course, who was a U.S. Senator from Nebraska from 2001 to 2013. He was the governor, the 37th governor of Nebraska from 1991 to 1999. I was a big fan and watched his work in the Senate. He was often a frustrating element to many of my friends who were on the Democratic side. He was a joy to many of my Republican friends on occasion, but occasionally a thorn in their side as well. But what I didn't know is I didn't know Ben Nelson could write. Who knew? You can hear senators tell stories but not write. But Senator Nelson, such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's great to be on. I appreciate Former Members Association giving this opportunity and the opportunity to talk to some people and listen to them as well. So I look forward to this hour.
Well, look, I think one of the interesting things, we want to get into the book, but I think why your book resonates with me beyond the title is you talk about the personal anguish you felt trying to do deals, be in that pragmatic center. And I'd love you to kind of open for our audience to tell us why this book was such a passion project for you. What are you trying to convey, not only about the moments you live, this is your lived experience, but how they impact this very moment we're in today?
Well, going to the Senate as a freshman in the Senate was a daunting experience because it was new to me. Obviously, I'd watched it from afar and a little closer than maybe someone else might have. But I knew some of the players. I never expected to know a Rockefeller or be a good personal friend of Ted Kennedy's or a whole host of new things to me at the time. So I tend to be a student, try to understand things before I draw a lot of opinions about them. So I went in almost like an open book to see what I could learn and how that would be helpful. When I campaigned in 2000, I said I would, of course, George W. Bush was running for president. Al Gore was running for president. And the question that partisans would throw at me was, well, what would you do if it was George W. Bush? So look, I'm going to support the president, whoever the president is, when I think the president's right. I won't when I don't, but I'm not going to obstruct. I'll try to find solutions and I'll work with the administration toward that and with my colleagues, because I'm not one who is just anxious to say no to everything. I think there are a lot of things that need to be done, and I want to be a participant in that. So having tried to carry that out over 12 years, it just seemed to me that was the sort of thing to write about. And particularly since partisanship, hyper-partisanship is predominated over these last several years more than in my opinion, ever before, at least in the modern era of 2000, since 2000. So that's a modern era for me right now. But anyway, it would just seem to me that there was something that I could say, because people are frustrated, worried, concerned internally within the Senate as well as externally.
One of the things that reminded me of when I was reading your book, you talk a little bit about political humor, and you talk about political humor not just being slapstick, but being as a part of your political toolkit. Dan Glickman, a former House member, former cabinet member, he was a designated survivor once in the Clinton administration,
Right.
That he often talks about. I love Dan. And Dan has written a book about political humor to kind of raise the question of it. But I'd love you to reflect on it as a part of your toolkit in affecting policy and affecting alliances in light now for the moment. But then you got to tell the story about Hillary Clinton and yeah.
And Claire McCaskill, and I almost
Yes.
put it on a couple of others.
Yeah.
Well, humor has always been a part of my life. From a youngster, I pulled pranks on my parents. As an only child, you're raised as an adult, so you're accepted in many ways as one of the threesome, and so I did that. And my classmates, and I've always had I don't know, a
Kind of puckish, a little bit puckish.
well, yeah. I mean, I can take as well as dish out. And you can't dish out if you can't take. So I can handle that. But I found that if my dad told me you can't make people like you, but you can make it hard for them not to. And one of the things that I found with humor is it's an icebreaker for sure. If people can have fun back and forth. Obviously, I'm serious about almost everything that I do, but it doesn't have to be without humor somewhere along the line. So that was the approach I took as a youngster, as in college, and in business and in life in general. As governor,
and then there's that day you're standing in line with a Bible in your hand, getting
yeah,
ready
there
to
we
get
are,
sworn in.
being ready to be sworn.
Big, thick Bible.
We all arrived there with a Bible because we were told to have one. We must have gotten 10 notices about having a Bible. Nobody would set it down in the cloakroom or anywhere else for fear you'd go to get it and it would be gone. So here we are clutching it, and Nebraska and New York are pretty close together in the line to go out and be sworn in by Al Gore at the time. And I don't know where I came up with this. I looked at Hillary, and she was looking so serious about it, and I just leaned over and I said, incidentally, what scripture are you going to read? She said, scripture. Nobody told me I had to read a scripture. Here you are standing in line. They're calling your names. She looked at me. She said, you're kidding. I said, yeah, I am. She said, oh, you almost caused me to have a heart attack. Do you do this very often? I said, all the time. Just get ready.
And then she said, go get Corzine.
Go get Corzine. Of course, I spent $50-some million of his own money to get elected. He leaned down and says, scripture. And I realized I could have stopped.
I think it's great. Well, another really funny thing with this is as I love the vignette of when you knew then Senator Obama, and you called him Barry, because some people when he was younger called him Barry, and then he turned around and said, well, I'm gonna, if you call me Barry, I'm gonna call you Benny. Yeah. And then this whole thing began about various names that people can do, including George W. Bush, who wanted to call you Nellie. Yeah. And you said, and you said, why not Hunter? Why not something more masculine, right? But the Benator and other things, a lot of different names. But I'm just sort of interested in your first name dramas and like how that happened, and how that kind of made pathways for you, particularly with President Obama. You were so keen on the Affordable Care Act. You were so key on a number of, getting the stimulus package passed, with George W. Bush and various issues. You did support going into the Iraq War. You were irritated by how much misinformation you were fed. But how did that play in some of these key decisions? I'll tell our audience that there are a number of chapters that go in to all the scaffolding and drama, the deals, the micro detail of things like the Iraq War, like the change in the filibuster and getting Justice is Through, The Gang of 14, and it is so rich in detail. But you always have these elements of humor and just razzing the president or vice versa.
Well, if you're able to do that back and forth, and of course, George W. Bush and I were governors together, so it wasn't our first encounter. And he has a fertile sense of humor as well. Going back and forth, we were able to close some gaps and make it easier to talk with one another. There was seriousness even in the midst of all the humor. But the humor was the icebreaker that made it easier to talk about these things. It's like the story that Trent Lott tells about Bill Clinton calling at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and Trent's an early riser, and I know from personal experience traveling with him, he goes to bed early too. So he'd be awakened by the phone call, and he'd say, "Mr. President, can't we talk about this tomorrow?" Well, he'd say, "Mr. President, don't you know what time it is?" Yeah, Trent, I can tell time, but it's important, right? Can't wait till tomorrow. Well, those relationships are important, and however you take whatever method you have of breaking the ice, you need to break the ice so that it is a one-to-one relationship, that you can deal authentically with one another as opposed to superficially.
Can you tell us about some of the lions that you identify in the book, and how important it is to have lions? And you sort of lament that there aren't many of those around anymore.
Well, there are not many called lions. There may be a few that think they're lions, and that's okay too. But it's usually the people that have been there for some period of time or have established themselves with some credibility, so that others will rely on them as to whether or not something makes sense or whether we ought to go a different direction. And it was people like Daniel Inouye or Trent Lott became essentially a lion as he was there. But you had Ted Kennedy, you had Robert Byrd, just John Warner. These were people that you could go to if you're fairly new, or even if you're not, to go to for advice, their opinion about something, instead of just having to go to the party leader, the caucus leader. That, to me, that's only one aspect of your leadership and followership. That is just one. I think it's become a big one, and that's one of the things I complain about too. It's too big. It's too disproportionate to how you get your information, when you're told how to vote.
You identified John McCain as one of those, and you said he helped you a lot with, and that he helped you a lot with anger management.
Well, John was working at anger management, but he wouldn't have gotten an A in the course. But was a great guy, because it didn't last long. But it was just something that was there, and everybody knew it, and you were able to deal with it, because beyond the anger was a very acceptable person, and his personality to work together. Because once he got through all that, the bluster was over. Then you got right down to the heart of whatever it was that you wanted to visit about.
Another thing that was interesting, I love the section about your desk in the Senate, on the Senate floor, being right next to Bernie Sanders, and that you kind of looked at it as a challenge to overcome, and you'll get to know Bernie, become pals with Bernie, hang out with Bernie, and then one day he was gone,
and he left,
and he had moved his. So what's that story?
Well, I looked over and he was gone.
Did you chase him away?
Well, he says I didn't. So, but I thought, well, maybe I did something I didn't do, or something I did. And Amy Klobuchar was there, and I said, well, Amy, hey, it's great to have you here, but what happened to Bernie? And she said, well, he came up and he asked if I would trade places with him, and she was up there higher in the by the aisle. And she said, yeah. She looked down, she said, you'd be fun to sit with, because I have a lot of practical jokes that I'm able to do. And so I said, come on, let's go up and find out what happened. I said, Bernie, you left me. Was it something I said, or something, my voting record, or something I did? Oh, no, camera angle's better up here. Well,
for C-SPAN.
Yeah, we both laughed. But, that was in 2006. We weren't thinking about Bernie Sanders running for president in 2006. So we looked at each other with kind of what's that all about? Well, we soon found out later that that was what he had in mind.
Let me ask you, a question about what it's like to take a vote, whether it's principle, something you felt you'd worked on, or you saw benefit in the other side, and to buck your party. And I think there are different dimensions in this. One is, how did you maintain a decent relationship with the Senate Democratic leader when you kind of flipped them off so many times in a way, and went with President, Bush in that case, or you had, voted differently? Because there are senators right now that, if you kind of look at some of the people you identified, Susan Collins or others who occasionally do this, Joe Manchin, of course, right now. But, I got to tell you, with Joe Manchin, Susan Collins, the votes that they take that are different in their party, Lisa Murkowski, even Mitt Romney, they pale in comparison to the number of votes you voted against your party. Like, you were more against than with, I think. But how did that go? And what are the storms around you? How did you what was your North Star in that?
Well, the most important thing politically within the caucus was to make sure that you didn't surprise the leader. The leader could I guess, acclimate to what you were going to do. So first of all, being authentic is important. Harry Reid, for example, knew that I represented Nebraska, and he knew that I would be doing things that might be different than somebody from New York or Connecticut or somewhere else. And so we got ground rules established there. And I didn't have a better friend in the Senate during or since than Harry Reid. We were very close personally because we understood one another, and that made it different. Then I think sometimes when people surprised about it, where did that vote come from? He knew where every vote was going to come from me. There was no surprises. That was our office motto, in effect, was we're not going to surprise the leadership. We are going to represent the people in Nebraska and the country first. Party is a factor, and if something doesn't matter, you obviously you'll support your colleagues. But if it really matters to Nebraska, it matters to you personally to do something differently, just make sure that you don't surprise people. Now, you don't please everybody. That's something that you have to deal with as well. But once again, if you're authentic and people understand that, they're more likely to go along with it, even though they might grumble and bite their tongue.
Now, I was surprised, not only by the quality of your book and writing, that you could actually write, Senator. I knew you could tell stories, but I was also, surprised that you ride around on tractors sometimes, and Harry Reid would call you when you're driving a tractor. But what's this whole thing about Harry Reid and how he ends a phone call?
Well, Harry just hangs up. That's what it did. It just would hang up. You knew the phone call was over because click, you heard it. He didn't say goodbye or anything. Well, one day I was on the tractor. I'm not always on the tractor, but I had some work that I needed to do. And
on a tractor. That's more than, with all due respect to everybody online, I bet that's not a line all of us can say.
They don't expect to see me on a tractor. I didn't grow up on a tractor as a kid. I grew up in town. Yeah. So I'm not trying to burnish my credentials as a farmer, but I do have some farming. But anyway, so the phone rings, and of course I look, and it comes across in red line words, Harry Reid. So I take it, and they say, "Do you have time to talk to Harry Reid?" I said, "Of course I do." They said, "Senator Reid." I knew which one, and I said, "Ben," he said, "just got a couple of things to talk about. How are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm fine." I didn't tell him I was on a tractor. I didn't let him know that he'd interrupted whatever little work I was doing, because I wanted to hear what he had to say. And he got through his business real quickly on it. I gave him my opinion on something. This was after, I was out of the Senate, and no, I guess I was still in the Senate. And at the end of it, he said, "Okay, well, thanks." And then he said, "Bye, B-Y-E, bye."
And that was a memorable moment for you.
Well, it was, but what made it even more memorable was when Chuck Schumer called to ask me if Harry had said goodbye, and I said yes. He said, "Well, he's never said goodbye to me." Well, he never said goodbye to me after that either. So, but it was just one of those times. But we all knew, and we all found that maybe not ingratiating, but we found it typical Harry style. It didn't mean anything bad. It was just the way he did things.
Well, look, that's a great story about Harry Reid. I thought I knew a lot about him, but never heard that. But I was, in 2005, 6, 7, a blogger, and I had a blog called the Washington Note, and Harry Reid would occasionally do these blogger conference calls. He'd be on with, talking to Senator Reid, and he would be chatting with us very openly. And I had, and he had said that there had been a case where a U.S. senator who was worried about the Abramoff scandal and about ethics and whatnot was interested in working across the aisle on Senate ethics reform and kind of looking at these issues. And then Harry Reid shared this with us and said, is this the time to to do that, or is it the time to show the difference between our side and their side? Mm-hmm. Well, I wrote about this. And I wrote about this on my blog. Then the next Sunday, George Stephanopoulos had Senator Barack Obama there. Oh. And Barack Obama had said, Senator, are you the unnamed senator in Steve Clemens' blog post? and he kind of hummed and hawed, but it created this enormous rift at that moment between John McCain and Barack Obama, because Barack Obama pulled away from McCain working on this ethics reformist stuff because of Harry Reid. So it's just sort of interesting, because I use this as a vignette of other senators involved in how much pressure there is not to work across the aisle, not to work on obviously a key public problem, but not for Barack Obama and John McCain to have worked together in 2006, 7, around that. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I think the thought that I have is that you respect the leadership. Absolutely respect it, but that doesn't mean respect requires that you always follow the leader. The leader gets to DC for the same reason you do. They got more votes than their opponent in the last election in their state. Then the caucus decides to make them leader of the caucus. Doesn't make them king of the caucus. That's what bothered me by Mitch McConnell's comments about his number one priority was to make sure that Barack Obama, I think it was 20, whatever year it was that he didn't get a second term. He didn't say it's a caucus. He said it was his number one goal. And then I saw him interviewed this weekend, in which he was asked if he would be supportive of Trump if Trump was the nominee. And he said, as chairman of the caucus and Republican, I've got to support that. Well, I have a different approach to that. If I have to do something like that to be chairman of the caucus, that's the first thing I'll give up is chairmanship of the caucus before I'll give up my freedom to decide who I'll support for president. Because I think too much power is sometimes given to or taken by a leader. Harry Reid and I had a good personal working relationship. It was the longest. We had one with Tom Daschle as well. I'm singling out Harry because it's most recent. But there was never any doubt what I was going to do. I just had to inform him.
So you talk a lot about the importance of gangs, and you became a gang leader, to be blunt. And tell us about that, and tell us what prospect there are for those kind of gangs in today's politics.
Well, I think, you can call it leader. I think I was a gang instigator, which meant that I went to some other people and said, what do you think about this? And could we do this? And the more you talked about it with them, the more they thought about it, the more inclined, depending what the issue was, to say yes or no. And that's the way you did it. Once again, you have to be authentic, where people believe you, trust you, and know they can rely on you if you're really going to do this. If you don't have to shake hands, but you don't have to. You trust. You don't even have to verify. It just happens if people trust one another and they agree on the idea that they can come together. Perfect examples is with John McCain and myself with respect to the Gang of 14. I talked to him about it. We set the stage. We got the requisite.
And tell the audience what the Gang of 14 was designed to fix.
It was designed to avoid having the nuclear option, to eliminate the filibuster in the appointment of federal judges. And the way to do that was to stop what appeared to be, to the Republicans, obstructionism by the Democrats and not getting enough up or down votes, taking everything to cloture to a majority of 60 votes on each and every nominee. That was clogging the system and not ending up getting the right number of federal we were going to have we were worried about a constitutional crisis with the poor health of the of one of the Senate, one of the members of the Supreme Court at the time. And so if we were going to, it was going to block everything, we needed to do something. And so 14 of us, 7 Dems and 7 Republicans, just came together and said, we will support an up or down vote, except in extraordinary circumstances. Yeah, it's interesting. Brett Kavanaugh back in 2005 happened to be an extraordinary circumstance. He was not supported to be moved out of the group, if you will. But that was the sort of camaraderie and collegiality that brought about a common view about how to approach this with the Dems and Republicans. It was collaboration, but in many ways, it truly was the ability to come together and make a decision about this, and not engage in the imposition of a cloture being thrown out, or the filibuster thrown aside as a nuclear option. And now it's in place, and we see the results of it.
Right. And so, and of course, Harry Reid opened that door. As you said, Mitch McConnell drove a Mack truck through it. Yeah. You know, Joe Manchin says it's one of the greatest mistakes ever made in the U.S. Senate. I think you concur. I do. But I was interested in your comments. You said Brett Kavanaugh would never have gotten confirmed through the Gang of 14 process you would establish. Would Ketanji Brown Jackson have gotten through?
I don't know. You know, it's possible that she wouldn't have, because if you don't know what people are going to focus on. But on the other hand, I think it was more likely that she would have gotten a majority of the votes if it hadn't boiled down to just a simple majority. Maybe she wouldn't have become the nominee. Maybe it would have been somebody else. What I'm pointing out is that going to the simple majority is an easy, quick fix, but the other side ends up not being very happy with the justices that get the number of votes that they get now, a simple majority. I don't know any Democrats who are at all appreciative of the last 3 Republican nominees that got approved, and there seemed to be some overwhelming majority of Republicans that wouldn't vote for Judge Jackson at the time either. So I think it was Joe Lieberman, and then others said it as well, that the things that he felt most comfortable with, that he was involved with, were those things were passed in a bipartisan way. And of all the things that you deal with, Supreme Court justices has to be near the top. Going to war is there too, but that has to be near the top. Should require that a supermajority vote of the Senate, because I think then the president in power will try to find somebody who is not considered to be partisan more than they will to find somebody that's going to be partisan, so that it fits your constituency wishes and desires. The litmus test. As governor, I appointed 50% of the judges in Nebraska, the entire Supreme Court, the entire Court of Appeals. I don't know that I was good at it, but I got a lot of experience. And I did not have a litmus test, because I wanted the judge to be there and apply the law as it is the law. I wanted to be able to, if I'm come before that judge practicing as a lawyer or as a plaintiff or defendant, to be able to read the law, not read the judge's mind. And I think we've departed from that. And that's the Mack truck that's been driven through the process. You
know, I guess one of the interesting questions I have for you is, I know you're not in the Senate now, but you're a keen observer, and so many of these folks are friends of yours and you talk to them. But if you're honest, the divides in this country right now aren't between Republicans and Democrats. They're between wings of these parties that internally they are in a kind of civil war themselves.
Yes.
If you look at the difference between, say, Joe Crowley, who was beaten by AOC, and
Yeah.
that kind of moderate, pragmatic wing, within the Democratic Party, or Joe Manchin versus a lot of the folks in the Democratic Party, or you look at, but I keep hearing from a lot of, Democrats who are in the closet that they really appreciate Joe Manchin being there,
Yeah.
So there's this kind of lack of profiles and courage, at least in public expression of some of this, and a very clear divide between what republicanism means, and is it a cult of Trump, or is it about principles? But what are your insights into how both parties are going through these convulsions?
Well, it makes it much more difficult. There's no question about it. Monolith is just not possible there, and nor should it be. But it doesn't have to be quite as divided as it is at the moment on every issue. If you're going to be that on every issue, then nothing gets done, and that is pretty close to what's been happening. Eventually, something happens, but it doesn't. Nobody's happy with it. And it used to be that was a sign of a good deal when nobody was happy. Both parties were unhappy. I'm one who thinks that it's just the opposite, that if you can work together, you'll find a solution that will please more people than it won't, because you'll get a supermajority vote for it. And I think that's what Joe Lieberman was referring to. And that's what I felt the same way. That when we had the Gang of 14, we just simply, we walked out of there smiling from our last meeting in agreement, and almost patting each other on the back and thanking each other. And it was there was a lot of spirit fun back and forth. For example, when I came up with the suggestion that we have the words except in extraordinary circumstances, which would then permit us to go ahead and vote against going to cloture, going for cloture, I guess. Anyway, that how do you define extraordinary circumstances? And John McCain said, was that like what was it Potter Stewart who said in the Supreme Court, it's like for porno, you'll know it when you see it. Well, I said, yeah, well, I don't think it's the same, but it's the same process. Yeah, you'll know when a nominee for the Supreme Court or for the federal judiciary drains all the blood from your head, you'll know it's extraordinary circumstances.
Well, I had forgotten what a deal maker you were in the middle of the financial crisis and the passage of the stimulus bill, which President Obama takes a lot of.
I had a lot of help before I take.
I know, but President Obama sometimes doesn't remember he had a lot of help. But you were helpful to him, and there were some really fun little battles in there with Arlen Specter over $10 billion for cancer about this. Tell us about some of the deal making that you had to do to get that stimulus package in 2009 passed.
Well, first of all, we had to have 3 Republicans, had to have all the Democrats, and had to have 3 Republicans to be able to get it done. And so as we worked through it, a larger group of Republicans, eventually it was down to Susan Collins and Olympia Snowe from Maine and Arlen Specter from Pennsylvania. And Arlen had been in poor health with fighting a battle against cancer. So he was very, very much aware of the National Institutes of Health and the importance of that. But we were looking for things that were stimulative. And while that was an important thing, I didn't think it was as stimulative as shovel-ready projects and stuff like that. Didn't mean that I didn't care about the National Institutes of Health, but our goal was to get as much as done that we could get. We could get money out to the people in a responsible way and have a result for it. And so during the discussion, for example, Arlen wanted more. And I said, whoa, we can't just keep putting more money in there. Well, he knew he had us by the throat because we needed his vote. And it was also starting to aggravate me a little bit because I knew he wanted the money, and I wanted the money to go there too, but I wanted to be stimulative, and it didn't seem like that was going to get that. And I didn't want this to fail because it was his project that others would say, what's stimulative about that? And then the vote against it. So we had more at stake. So I decided that I'd had it, and I walked out the door, and Rahm Emanuel happened to be there, and my staffer, Joe Britton, who was very capable, was there. And Rahm got excited. Looked like it was going to fail.
Well, Rahm was angry at you.
He was angry. And so he grabs
Yeah.
me and he says, you can't go out the door and all this. And Joe Britton was trying to explain to him, and Joe has a gruff voice, and it kind of like, so Rahm turned around and said, don't bark at me. Well, it caused me to laugh a little bit, and
well, he actually said, you can't bark at me, which is an unusual statement to come from Rahm Emanuel.
Yeah, well, he's a
pretty good barker.
He's a good barker. So he recognized it when he heard it, but Joe just has a husky voice. He was just trying to explain it. But anyway, that was a sort of thing. And Arlen and I were the best of friends before, the best of friends during. We just disagreed, and we were the best of friends afterwards. As together with Susan Collins, who had some concerns about the money going to school buildings, because we want schools to continue to have primary responsibility at the state level and local level and stuff like that. So there were some things that had to be resolved, and we resolved them, and we had the votes in the past.
Another role I didn't know you had played was being so involved in Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal. That's a part of your history I was unaware of. Mm-hmm. How did you become involved in that? How did that play out? How your conversation with people like Mike Mullen, kind of looking at the duplicity was built into the oaths. I mean, this was directly relevant to me, at one point where I was getting signed up for ROTC, and it says, are you a certain kind of person? And everybody had to say yes if you wanted to be in it. If not, you got like, this taint. So what you wrote was very, very powerful for me, but I'd love our audience to hear about how you saw that moment, because right now it looks easy, but at that time it wasn't.
Well, it was politically and emotionally charged. The whole question about don't ask, don't tell. Obviously, the military and Congress hadn't been able to, and the president hadn't been able to get together and say, no, we will admit people who are gay or of some other variety of that description. So they couldn't find a way to do that. So they came up with this, where we're going to look the other way, and everybody has to look the other way. And I talked to my staff about it, and the more we talked about it, the more we said, let's find a way to say this simply. And what really stood out is you're expecting people to lie. Look the other way to lie, or not tell the truth. So there are the lies. And what are the tenets or the goals and the aims and the values of the military? What's at the top? Truthfulness, reliance on one another. And yet we were creating this facade of it was okay to lie as long as it's about this. Can't lie about anything else. That didn't make any sense. So I guess we talked about it, and finally one of us said, well, what you're telling me is or what somebody would say is they're looking to, I don't want to lie, as you say, I don't want to lie, but I can't tell you the truth. You're making it impossible for me to tell you the truth about something. And then that just runs counter through the whole thing of the military. So I asked Admiral Mullen, I said, isn't it like that? Isn't it like saying, I don't want to lie, but you won't let me tell the truth? And that affects everybody. He said, Senator, that's it. And we went back and forth on it just privately to begin with. And then I asked the question the same way in the hearing. And it made it possible for people who couldn't get the votes to say gays and transgenders and others can't serve in the military, that it gave them a way to be able to say, well, if we're going to do it, we don't want to break our esprit de corps of the value of truthfulness any longer. Let's I guess that's the way you can do it. And then it made sense that way, as opposed to being a politically charged thing about being for gays, against gays, and this, that, and the other, because that decision had already been made. They can be in the military. They just can't talk about it, and you can't talk about it either.
Tell us this. Tell us the story, Senator, of the napkin, Dick Cheney, and Bob Woodward.
Well, during the first Bush tax cut, there was a lot of discussion about how much was too much and how much wasn't enough. And a handful of us had decided that the top number, 1.6 trillion, was too much. And we were much more inclined to go with 1.2 or 1.3 or something like that. And so somewhere along the line, it fell on my shoulders to go to a meeting with Vice President Cheney, whom I had known, was born in Nebraska, raised in Nebraska until he found his way to Wyoming somehow with his parents. And in this meeting, in the majority, I guess it was majority speaker at that time, Jim Jeffords hadn't switched party, was in Trent Lott's office, his hideaway office. And so the question was, what's the number? And I said, well, we were looking at 1.25, 1.3 or something like that. And the vice president took one of the napkins, says majority leader on it, and wrote down 1.6, 1.425. Got it up on the wall, the napkin. And so we had we had 1.2 at the bottom, I believe it was. So anyway, yep. And so 1.425 was now what, compromise, I'd say, but still, before it became a four-letter word, that's what it was. And I just picked up the napkin, put it in my pocket as a keepsake.
Yeah.
Sometime later, after the discussion was over and we were working on it, Bob Woodward wanted to interview me. He was doing something on the Bush tax cuts in the first half year of the Bush administration's first year. So he came in and he said, somebody in the White House, and I'd said something about we were working on a compromise and we're working with the White House. And he said that someone in the White House had told him that wasn't true, that I wasn't working with somebody in the White House. In other words, it was a soft way of saying I wasn't telling the truth.
Right.
And so I said, really? And I happened to remember that I had in my desk the napkin. So I went over and pulled the napkin out of the desk, brought it back over, handed it to him, explained what had happened. He looked at it. He looked out the window. He said, I don't remember exactly how he said it, but it was, well, something like that. So I didn't take it for evidence. I'm a lawyer, but I didn't take it for evidence. I didn't know that I was going to need it, but I was glad I had it.
Well, I mean, did you tell Bob Woodward at that time, go back to whoever you talked to at the White House and tell them they're liars?
I didn't have to.
One
of those incidents that almost spoke for itself, because it wasn't up to me to get into a tete-a-tete with them. On the other hand, they had some explaining to do.
Well, I want to remind our audience that's online that feel free to post your questions or comments, your alternative reality or your alternative recollections in the comments box, and I'll be sure to go to them. And let's go to the McCook, Nebraska. Right, you were born in McCook, Nebraska. I didn't know where McCook was, and now I know about it. It turns out there's some interesting people from McCook, and one guy named George Norris. And you think George Norris? I'd love our audience to understand why you find George Norris to be such an important figure. And you've actually made an appeal in your book to the senators to put him in his right place in history.
That's right. Well, I guess for a couple of reasons. One is that every Memorial Day, back in the early days, it was called Decoration Day. When we went out to the cemetery for the family plot to put out flowers and respect our family, we drove right past the George W. Norris Memorial, his tombstone, if you will. And my dad would say to me, son, there is the greatest United States senator ever. And he talked to me about public power, because my dad worked for public power all of his life. He was devoted to public power. So that stuck with me from the time I was 3, 4, 5 years old or older. And then, of course, once I found out about it, then went past the house and then found that after George W. Norris had passed away himself, his wife continued to live in the house and was a close friend of my aunt Grace, who lived just up the street. And so the more I got to know about it, and then I went past that house a lot riding on my bicycle, and I saw it, and I got interested in it. And as time went on, I studied about him and learned more about him, and I found his style appealed to me even as a kid. That this is somebody that could get something done, that he always found something and he stood for something. Well, then later, profiles encouraged by John F. Kennedy listed him high, and unfortunately, 2 U.S. senators in Nebraska blocked. They happened to be of George W. Norris changed to be an independent. He'd been a Republican for 30 some years in the House and the Senate, and then he ran as an independent. And they held that against him and denied him a place on Statuary Hall, even though he was the top vote getter for being in the Statuary Hall. Well, I just said he needs to get his rightful place in Nebraska's history. I think he achieved it, and it just needs to be recognized. It needs to be recognized as well in the Senate.
It's fascinating. I mean, he kind of wrangled with Woodrow Wilson. He wrangled with, people over what the terms of America's engagement was. And, he was not I think one of the things he really caught my eye, which is similar about you, Joe Manchin, some others, is you're not folks that are easily bandwagoned on board, right? So, and elevating that is an interesting question, which is why I find your book to be such an incredibly important and interesting read. But what do you do to change the incentive structure, if that's what it is, or the outcome structure in politics, so that kind of behavior is more the norm and less rare?
Well, the first step is to be sure that you send people to Washington who promise to do that. And that isn't happening enough today. It needs to happen more. You can't send people who come to Washington with a single issue or with a commitment to partisanship that they cannot separate themselves from their partisanship, their ideals, to find a solution. They'd rather say no than maybe, and they can't say yes in so many different ways that they need to find a way to be able to do that. It's too important to the country to have a partisan divide that we have that can't get crossed, that neither leader would allow the other to cross without some consequence or consequence back home with the party back home. A couple of the Nebraska senators who happen to be Republicans have done something, that decided to do something, said something, voted a certain way, and they've been chastised and by certain committees within the state and within their party. It's too partisan for its own good, and I think it's too much led by the caucus leader. You have to follow the leader right under the current situation. I'm going to listen to the leader, and I'll factor that advice and that suggestion. I will not take an order from the leader.
Let me ask you, one of the things that happened, in broad daylight was a collision between the Build Back Better plan. One time Bernie Sanders had a $6 trillion bill on it, then went down to 3.5, and then Joe Manchin said he's not going to go above 1.5, and ended up being around 1.75 in terms of what they were talking about. And you had basically a train wreck there. And now, I wrote the big story on what happened. We don't have to go there, but you've got Joe Manchin now basically saying he wants to take the gang approach. He wants to get those senators that were involved in putting together a bipartisan infrastructure bill and look at how you could do a climate and energy bill with that same kind of approach, and put most of it through regular order. You may still need reconciliation for some things, but let's not use reconciliation and load it up as a 9,000-pound truck, right? So, maybe folks, I'm not good at pounds and trucks, but lot of stuff on a truck. But I guess my question to you is, if you were giving Senator Manchin counsel, and if you were giving Joe Biden counsel as to what would be the most constructive steps forward, not just to pass something, but to do something that would be healthy for the country, what would that be?
Well, it would be something that would not be a budget buster. And given our tentative situation right now with inflation, obviously we're going to have more expense associated with the war with Ukraine with Russia to try to help support the Ukrainians. So as you look at that, you've got to balance everything. If my staff used to tease me about, as a governor and then in the Senate too, as being as tight as three coats of paint. Well, I think you have to take that approach as to what can you do, not just simply what do you want to do, what's it possible to do, not just what you'd like to do, and you try to get that to balance it out to begin with. And if you get that balance going, then you're more likely to find people on both sides of the aisle to find a solution. So my advice is make sure that you get a number that enough people can live with. It can't be exceptional. It's got to be much more doable to get it done. That's how you establish partisanship. And you can't make, if somebody stands out for everything, I want everything, they've got to prepare to take nothing. My chief of staff used to say, if you're going to tell somebody to go to hell, be prepared to take them there. If they say all or nothing, they got to take nothing if they can't get everything. So that's a mindset to get people thinking to begin with, or you're never going to find a way to cross the aisle or come up with a solution like a gang.
Look, the powerful kicker of your book, and then I'm going to take a question from the audience. The powerful is about January 6th. And you said there was nobody there that stormed the Capitol that was a good person. You can't say they were good people and engaged in that kind of law-breaking attack on the Constitution, on the capital of this country. And your final two words were he failed, and that's Donald Trump. So I'd love to know what your reflection is on that in this moment. I've talked to a number of senators who agree so wholeheartedly, but don't know how to get there, that if we don't begin creating that space in the middle to begin working together, then January 6th metaphorically will continue to happen in other ways.
Well, exactly. Now, when I say they weren't good people, they weren't doing good things. Now, that doesn't mean they've never done good or whatever. They couldn't be good people while they were doing what they were doing. Motivations could not be good. This is America. This is a democracy. You don't change government the way that they were wanting to do it. You do it in court. You do it in the legislature. You do it in your county board. You do it in your city council. You do it through the traditional American way. That's what I meant by they can't be good people doing what they were doing. Now, if you can appeal to them to look toward the way you do things and get them to understand the wrongness of what they were doing, then I think maybe some of those will be there as well, because they're frustrated. They're upset. They didn't think they were getting a fair shake with the elections. They weren't listening to people who were telling them from the trenches, yeah, we were counting the votes. They were all right. They couldn't listen to that. So it seems to me that today, listening to one another is still an important thing to do, as opposed to taking a position, finding others agree with you, and then standing there and not listening to anybody else, just standing there. Right or wrong, that's the way I'm going to be.
Right. Well, let's take finally, there's a question here that coincides with what my last question was going to be. The questioner asked, what are a few key reforms that would help make the Senate work better today? I'll tell our audience there's a chapter called Saving the Senate, with a multi-pronged action plan, if you will, of saying, if you want to save this institution and save the Senate, here's some things we might do. So what would some of those be?
Well, first of all, you have to be able to know one another in the Senate. The interviews that we did with a variety of the former senators that Democrats and Republicans alike said that the short work week is a problem. Going home every weekend is a problem. Not spending enough time socializing together, getting to know one another. Where if you know somebody and they're authentic, it's amazing how well you can get along with one another. That's number one. But getting the dark money out and the amount of money that it takes to run, so that the time spent to raise the money is a factor. But it also means that you can't. There was one thing that happened that I think that it really got me, and that was that the decision to send the Republican leader Bill Frist into South Dakota to campaign against the Democratic leader Tom Daschle. I'm not aware of that ever happening before, and if Tom Daschle lost. Now, if Tom Daschle had won, how was he going to be able to work with Bill Frist from that day forward? That's just a factor that you keep in mind. I very carefully didn't give from my leadership PAC money to people that who were running against an incumbent Republican or Democrat, because I didn't want that to be any kind of a block against my ability to work with somebody from the other side. John Bro said it very well. If you're there living together, working together, and spending more time together, and you're there on a Friday night, you're not very likely to knife each other on Monday morning when you come to work. There is something to be said about knowing one another. Congressional delegation trips are not junkets. These are opportunities to learn something in the area that you're going to, or learning about that area. Also, spending time together. Maybe it's forced because you're there, forced to be together, but whatever the reason, people get to know one another. And I think that you have a better idea of how you can work together with this person, or how you're not going to be able to work with this person, but maybe you can change it. Those are just some of the things. Getting the filibuster back, not taking the filibuster out for judges, but not losing the filibuster to regular legislation. That would turn the Senate into a smaller version of the House, which is a raucous group, as it's designed to be that. Maybe it's more. Maybe the design wasn't quite so is more successful than the framers of the Constitution expected it to be, but it was not intended to be a deliberative body to the same extent that the Senate is, with the filibuster there to moderate the outcomes.
Well, look, I think it's incredible reflections. I'll tell you to read it. And when you're just talking about, camaraderie, it's not like both parties are ever going to be fully agreed or fully supportive of each other, but just, two vignettes just to pop into my mind is that Senator Schumer spent about $100 million in the state of Maine to try to beat Susan Collins. And so when you need Susan Collins for a lot of the stuff to do, that makes that bridge a little wobbly. And then this past weekend, Senator Joe Manchin, guess where he was? He was in Alaska doing some campaign events for Lisa Murkowski. So you kind of look at, if you need a moderate thing in there and you're going to kind of be looking at the long term, it's a thing. If you take out the moderates as opposed to those that are ideologically impossible, you end up with the kind of world you've been describing. So I very much want to be in the saving the Senate chapter, not the death of the Senate cover. But nonetheless, I'll show you all of this, that if we don't fix this, you could get the death of the Senate. This is by Senator Ben Nelson. It's a wonderful book. I want to thank you, sir, for a great conversation. Thanks for joining the Association of the Former Members of Congress.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for paying attention. If you were, thank you all.
Thank you.